Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Elise Pinchback Johnson, and I will be moderating our session today. And our session is entitled What Success Looks Like, Addressing the Academic and Opportunity Achievement Gap for Students. And before we hop in, I'll maybe wait a hot second. I hear a couple people coming in, so I'll give them about 5 seconds to get in and get adjusted. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists. I'm not sure if you all see the same view as I do, but I know if you scroll down, you can see the speakers, and if you click, you can see their full bios. But I did want to say a few words about each of them. These are some very distinguished guests that we have. So let me just give a little overview of their biographies. So first, Dr. Valerie Kinlock began her tenure as the Renee and Richard Goldman Dean of the University of Pittsburgh School of Education in July 2017. Under her leadership, the school has adopted a forward-thinking mission vision that places equity, justice, and innovation at its core. Dean Kinlock is a nationally known educator whose scholarship focuses on the literacy, language, culture, and community engagements of youth and adults, both inside and outside of schools. She's the author of numerous books on race and literacy, including the newly released Race, Justice, and Activism in Literacy Instruction, and several other critically acclaimed works. Among other roles, Dean Kinlock is a fellow of the American Education Research Association, a fellow of the American Council on Education, an elected member of the Board of Trustees of her undergraduate alma mater, Johnson C. Smith University, and a co-chair of Remake Learning. She's also my dean because I'm back in school. I'm getting a EDD in urban education, so I'm excited to be at the School of Education under Dr. Kinlock's leadership. And also she is my co-principal instructor with the Shifting Power Project, which is a special initiative of Remake Learning. So we're super excited to have Dr. Kinlock with us today. Dr. Mark Abraham is the founder and CEO of MEA Consultants, LLC, which he designed to help poorly performing schools and organizations increase achievement for all students, especially young men of color. As a thought leader for men of color, author, and motivational speaker, Dr. Abraham has presented to various education audiences and school districts in New York and across the country. His most recent article, Culturally Proficient Leadership, Improving the High School Graduation Rate for Black Males, appeared in the February issue of Principal Leadership. Dr. Abraham's strategies for increasing graduation rates for males of color has been featured in SREB's Promising Practices newsletter, the Buffalo News, and on local radio. He was also recently recognized by the mayor of Buffalo, New York, as one of the top principals in the city of Buffalo. McKinley High School, where he was principal, was cited by New York State Education Department for having one of the highest graduation rates for males of color in New York. Dr. Abraham, we are super excited to have you here as well. So as Dr. Kathy said, this is a chat. I am going to say a few words and kind of set the context. I'm going to open it up to Drs. Kinlock and Abraham to start the conversation and to give us their thoughts and reactions to some of the things I'll share and a little bit of context about the work that they're doing. I have a couple more questions that I'll ask based on those remarks. And then we really do want to open it up for a dialogue with you all. I do also see over here in the panel that there are some questions on the side. And so we can definitely get to some of those questions too at some point. So let me just start by talking about achievement gap. So this is a term I think we've heard quite a bit. We hear it a lot. And so just to kind of give a definition. So according to an article I was reading in Education Week, achievement gap refers to the disparity in academic performance between groups of students. We know this shows up in a lot of ways, in grades, standardized test scores, course selection, dropout rates, college completion rates, etc. Pretty much any success measures that we have. It's most often used to describe troubling performance gaps between African American and Hispanic students and other students of color at the lower end of the performance scale, and non-Hispanic white students at the other end. And so I did some reflection, and I also want to shout out, my professors who have been taking us along this equity journey, like the Pitt School of Education does. We had a reading the other week, and it really resonated with me. And I'm like, I need to bring this into the session in some ways. And so, I was thinking, in some ways, we really talk about this achievement gap as if it's something that just exists and that it's inevitable. But there was an article that we were reading, and it was called Liberating Urban Education for Human Freedom. And the authors of the article really stopped and had us think about the fact that, the achievement gap is really the direct result and intention of integration. And so let me share this quote with you. It said, integration was thus not an attempt to merge cultures or even to accommodate cultural differences, but an assimilation effort in which Black culture was considered detrimental and students' ways of knowing and being were considered deficits. And consequently, given prevailing assumptions about the superiority of the white race and inferiority of Black people, it was thought that for Black students to achieve on par with white students, they would need to adapt to and exist and to exhibit the cultural norms of the dominant group. They also go on to say, it is our contention that research frameworks ignore this reality and explain inequity in urban education by focusing on and defining, quote, Black-white outcome disparities only in terms of an achievement gap rather than a failure of integration. And I was just like, whoa, oh my goodness. And so I think it really, for me, just illuminated this thought. We talk about the erasure of Black ways of knowing, Black ways of being, the value of what Black people brought to this country. And then we think about how we were assimilated into public education systems. And then we wonder why, when forced to have to ascribe to or achieve, to the level of the dominant culture, why we see this, quote, gap. And so, reading that, it really resonated with me. So let me just take it a step further and think about that through a local context. So Pittsburgh Public Schools was established in 1835. By 1838, there were 12 schools, only one for Black students. And it wasn't until about 100 years later that we saw our first Black teacher, and about in 1955, the first Black male principal, and in 1961, the first Black female principal. So when we think about, Pittsburgh Public Schools, and we'll get into some conversation about the Memorandum of Understanding, the devaluing of Black minds through segregation and lack of investment was literally embedded in this system. 12 schools, one for Black children, 100 years of a school district, and before we saw our first Black teacher. So let's fast forward to 1992. 1992, almost 30 years ago, was when the Advocates for African American Students filed a complaint with the PA Human Relations Commission alleging discrimination. It wasn't until 2006 that the conciliation agreement was reached. And to this day, the Equity Advisory Panel, which is comprised of some of the original complainants and also other Black community members, are negotiating yet another extension of the conciliation agreement as we speak. So in 2020, last year in October, the PA Human Relations Commission released a report outlining the progress made on the items in the Memorandum of Understanding between PPS and the Equity Advisory Panel. And so the big takeaway from that report, Black students are not only performing at a significantly lower achievement level than their white counterparts, but they're also facing harsher punishments and less access to educational resources than white students. So a few statistics, and thanks to Gwen's Girls for really pulling some of these out and sharing a summary. 8th grade students, African-American students, performed 121% lower than white students during the 2018-19 school year. African-American students receive a 4 to 10 day suspension at a rate of 118% higher than their white peers. And African-American students are placed in special education at a rate 91% greater than their white peers. The list goes on. Basically the takeaway is that literally when we think about achievement of Black students in Pittsburgh Public Schools, literally it falls along racial lines. And it's really predictable by race. And that's what we see, I think, a lot in the conversations that we see around this, quote, achievement gap that exists, or as, Dr. King, Akua, and Russell will call it, the failure of integration and the devaluing of Black minds. So I'm going to stop here for now. I've said a lot, but I wanted to really kind of just set us up to have a conversation, to really point out the importance of the use of language. Achievement gap, opportunity gap are terms that we're used to and things that we talk about. But the hope is to really kind of push our thinking a little bit more about what are some of those root causes. And then, hear from Drs. Kinlock, Dr. Abraham about what they're doing in this area, but also to open it up to hear from you all about what you all are doing, how we can collaborate, and hopefully this can be the beginning of a conversation to really move the needle for our students. So let me open it up to our panelists. Feel free to introduce yourself, share some thoughts and reactions you may have to some of the context I shared, and then anything else you'd like to say to level set for today's conversation.
I defer to you first, Dr. Abram.
All right, cool. I was being a gentleman, the Southern gentleman that I am, and saying ladies first, but hey, it is what it is. Hey, family, I just want to say hello. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, for introducing me. Again, my name is Dr. Mark Abraham. I am the president of MEA Consulting Services, LLC. I'm the author of the new book, What Success Looks Like, Increasing High School Graduation Rates for Young Men of Color. I do want to say that as you're pointing out these statistics locally, the sad thing about it is those stats are the same around the country. When we look at Black children, especially our young Black males, and that's what my research is in, they have the highest suspension rate. They have the highest rate to special education. They have the lowest graduation rates, the lowest ELA test scores, the lowest math scores. And oftentimes in the research, what I saw that made me do something different was that most of the research is looking at Black and brown children from a deficit model. And most times when I go around the country, we're so conditioned to think that, and even Black people, I really want us to deconstruct our thinking around our Black and brown children, right? Because we suffer from the same implicit bias that our white counterparts suffer from. So I think that's a real conversation we need to have. We really need to start to really check our paradigm and really say, how are we thinking? I think Dr. Woodson said it in 1933, the miseducation of the Negro, when he talked about we're being exposed to all of the negative statistics with regards to Black and brown children. And oftentimes we have a propensity to want to really believe in those stats that they're feeding us over and over again. The reality is, what I decided to do as a researcher is say, what are some of the successful strategies schools are using to increase student performance for Black and brown males? Because there are a lot of statistics out there, and there are a lot of good schools doing good work. So when we talk about that achievement gap, really, I hear most people say this, it's not an achievement gap, it's an expectation gap. When I have the bar set so low for Black and brown children, I expect nothing from them, so then we get the results that we have. I say this to people all the time. I say it's comical, but it's sad at the same time. Our Black and brown children can believe in Superman, Batman, Transformers. They can believe in everything, Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy. They can believe in everything, but they can't, you're telling me they can't believe that they're brilliant and that they could be successful? The problem is not that they can't believe, it's the problem is the adults that are there are not holding them and believing in them, so that consequently they're not getting the same, we're not getting the same return. So I as a high school principal, I really never prescribed to this idea that there's that this achievement gap is going to cause my school to have any issues. I let people know that when kids walk into our building, my expectation is that you're going to teach them, you're going to love them, and you're going to create a culture where we hold a high standard for them so that they can have success. As a result, we took a graduation rate from 60% to 87% in about 3 years, and 94% for Black males, one of the highest in the country. So really, when I hear people talking about achievement gap, I always am thinking, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China, right? Like, your job is to educate children. Your job is to see kids that come in and take them from wherever level they are and bring them to the level that they can be. I hear it, and the new term is educational loss. And then when you ask people to really define that, they have a hard time really getting you nailed down to this idea of how do you really explain educational loss, because when we talk about educational loss, more than likely is pointing to Black and brown children. And I'll say this last point, Doc. We have to get rid of these notions that we want to blame, because this is what the research says. We want to blame Black and brown skin for failure. We want to blame poverty for failure. We want to blame parents for failure. We want to blame rap music, style of dress, all of these things that are uncontrollable factors we want to blame for this low academic achievement. Really, the biggest issue that my work finds is that when Black and brown children are not having success, the biggest issue is the school system. It's the teachers and it's the administrators that are not providing a quality instruction for those children so that they can be successful, because all of our kids can learn at a high level. And it's the job of the educators to make sure that happens.
All right, thank you for that. I'll just jump right on in and say I'm happy to be here. So thank you for having me and in this conversation with some brilliant folks. I'm Valerie Kenlock, as Elise has introduced me. I'm the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm also a professor in the School of Education, and I think deeply about literacy studies. I think about the ways in which we need to make sense of who we are in relation to who other people are. So it's not just about reading and writing, although those are fundamental. It's essentially about the ways that people engage with each other in order to understand the type of world that we all seek to live in or should want to live in. And that's the way that I enter into this conversation. That's the way I enter into the work that I do. That's the way that I enter into the research that I write. And, there's also research on the other hand that does say that Black people are brilliant, that Black people come from a history and a legacy of brilliance and intelligence, that we already have agency, that we know who we are and what we need, and we don't need to be told what we need or what we want, but we need to be invited into conversations where we are offering a roadmap for what we already know how to do. And that's the research that I rely on. That's the research I turn to. I think that we have to be clear about when we talk about teaching, learning, and leading, particularly in higher education or in public school education, we oftentimes talk about what people should be doing as opposed to focusing on what people already know how to do and how we need to support people to do the work that they already know how to do. Our kids know how to think. Our kids know how to read and write. Our kids know what it means to be in community with other people. Our kids are creating worlds that we have yet to imagine as adults. And if we do move out the way, then those worlds that they are creating and imagining and designing can radically impact teaching, learning, and leading. But we have to make space for those various perspectives, those ways of being, those ways of dreaming. And I contend that we already know how to do this. I look at all the different reports and the reports that say that Black kids in particular, in this case, are not performing on the same level as white kids. If we take that as truth, and I don't, we have to first understand the questions that we need to ask. What are we teaching our kids? Who's doing the teaching of our kids? What do our classrooms look like? Who's in front of the classroom teaching and working with our kids? Essentially, who is in the building leading other faculty, other teachers, other staff, other ed support people, and our kids and families to do the work of education? Now, if we're not asking those questions, because those are all about representation, then we're not really asking the questions about what we can do differently. And I think that fundamentally, we have to start there. We have conversations about achievement gaps. We talk about achievement gaps. I want to talk about opportunity gaps. It is not just what people can achieve or cannot achieve. That's not the question. The question for me is, are people afforded opportunities to learn, to survive, and to thrive? And those opportunities are wrapped around what resources are made available for them to do the work that we know they could be doing if provided opportunity. And, and it's Linda Darling Hammond, she talks and writes so well about opportunity gap. And it's Linda Darling Hammond who says that when we talk about opportunity, one of the things that we need to talk about is the opportunity to learn. And she talks about having the necessary resources, having the curricular opportunities, having quality teachers, having people in our spaces who actually care about us, having the things that more affluent school districts have, and having them for our kids, and having an understanding of what we need to do to improve our learning conditions and our living situations for us. And that's all about, do we have an opportunity to do the work that we should be doing because we have resources that have been redistributed to us and that we are using in ways that better understandings of Black intellectual and cultural traditions. And I think fundamentally, that's one of the things that we have to grapple with. So here in the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh, one of the things that I am overly concerned about is having a new way of talking about equity and justice in education. We're not just talking about what these things mean. We are enacting practices and principles that get us to firmly understand the importance of equity and justice in education because we're a school of education. If we could have these conversations wrapped around strategies and implementable action, then we get closer to thinking about the possibilities of educating ourselves and our kids and our families and our communities in ways that are right, in ways that are liberating, in ways that get us to understand what we should be doing because we have the opportunity and resources to do the work. And that's the work that I'm committed to doing. And so I'm just thankful to be in this conversation. And I'm going to pause there, Elise.
Okay, thank you both. So lots of things that are on my mind, based on some of the things that you all both shared. And so, one thing that I think you both kind of touched on is just thinking about the who, and kind of who is in front of our kids, who is making a decision on behalf of our children. And I know that you both have a unique vantage point in the way that you all do that, through Dr. Abraham, some of the capacity building and professional development you do, of course, with you, Dr. Kinlock, being a dean of a school of educations. And so I'd love for you all to talk a little bit about, what it looks like to really do the work of helping the folks who are in front of kids and making decisions on behalf of kids to do that transformational work.
I think that's a great point. Again, I really, really want to drill this down because, you're at this conference, you're hearing a lot of good things. The achievement gap problem is not the children. The achievement gap problem are the adults that are teaching the children. I want you to hear that and understand that and be clear that the kids come to the table with a set of skills and they can be successful. It's what we believe about them. So when I'm working with educators around the country, really we get into your paradigm to say, how do you view kids and how do you view your system that you have in place right now? I'm a big proponent that for school leaders to have success, they must put in successful systems. One thing that I preach and teach about all the time is you have to know your data with regards to school leadership. As a school principal, my job was to clearly understand my data and not have a myopic perspective of data. And then you also have to understand there's two data sets that are present, that are operating all the time in your building. There is quantitative data, which is simply the numbers. And then there's qualitative data. It's the voices, it's what people are saying about the school. What do teachers say about the kids? You know what they say. What do you say about the kids? See, you would not have success in a school. You would not have any success if you believe the kids can't have success. So it must start with a paradigm shift that the kids are going to be successful in the school because I'm there as the school principal, assistant principal, teacher. I don't care what strategy, who you learn it from, it don't matter. If you do not settle and resolve that issue in your mind, that these children can be successful, you're not going to get anything done. I can teach you all the research, all the strategies, I can give you all the best stuff, but it must first start with your thinking and say, these kids can be successful and they deserve a quality education. My first chapter of my book is called Love and Data. Love, you got to love the kids as they walk in, because love raises the expectation. Love raises the bar. Love says, I believe you can do all things. And then you got to understand and have a good grasp of your data, but not just data from 1 year perspective, but you got to have it from 3, 4, 5 years so that you can have a baseline. But it's not just, oh, what's your graduation rate and your reading scores? It's your ELA scores, it's your math scores, it's your attendance scores, it's your teacher attendance scores. Again, I look at things from the lens of a leader. So how do your teachers come to school? If your teachers ain't coming to school every single day, that tells you that you have a culture problem. It tells you that they don't feel bought into the school. Last thing I'll say, because I want to, Dr. Valerie, I just enjoy listening to her talk. I'm writing notes as we speak. I believe a short pencil is better than a long memory. Remember that, folks. Don't just sit up here just nodding amen, and then you think you're going to walk out of this thing and you're going to remember it. I promise you, you won't. So let me say this one thing. When I graduated high school, I was illiterate. How did I make it from K through 12 all the way through a system and can't read? My first year at University of Buffalo, I had a 1.4 GPA. I turned in my paper, an ELA paper, to my teacher, and I gave her the paper, and she gave it back to me. I felt so good. She had so much red on it, and I was like, oh, this is blessed. She put the blood of Jesus on it. I was wrong, right? So the system, and I say that to say this, I'm a doctor now. I ain't a pretend doctor. I ain't got no online degree. I'm a real doctor. But it happened once I started to get people to start to challenge me and then put supports around me and then teach me how to do the work and help me understand that literacy is a skill, writing is a skill, reading is a skill. And if I can learn one skill, I can learn that skill. So the biggest problem we have in education, I say it again and I stand firmly on this, is not the kids. It ain't the parents. Stop telling me it's the parents. It's you. When you look in the mirror and you see yourself, you the problem. And if your face ain't fixed, if your face ain't fixed and you ugly, you got two problems. You can't teach and you're ugly. That's it. I'm just telling you, you got issues, people. So remind yourself, when you want to talk about these kids, they not the problems. You can't tell me that this young boy is a football player, quarterback. He know how to remember 1,500 plays, why people are attacking him, can change a play and throw the football and be successful at it, but he can't learn 2 + 2. You a liar. I'm sorry. I said, I stopped. Go ahead, Doc. Don't get me started because I'll be rolling, man. I'll be here all day.
Wait, you want me to follow that? No, you gotta come on back on. You gotta unmute yourself. You can't just throw that to me like that. You want me to follow what you just said?
Yeah. Hey, Doc, I told you I'm writing notes. I got my phone here, girl. I'm out here writing what you said. I'm like, all right, there it is. That's how I'm gonna say that next time. She saw so eloquent. I still got that Southern accent. I'm still Miami, Florida. The Lord's still working on me.
You know what? Hey, I mean, I don't know what kind of accent I might have, but I am Charleston, South Carolina, all day, every day. So the South is still present.
There you go.
And I say that because what's the question, Elise? Because he just answered it.
So we're thinking about, both of you all talked a little bit about the people who are in front of children, the people who are making decisions. And so just thinking about from your vantage point, what does it look like and to really help to change the mindsets and change the way in which the people who are in front of kids and people who are making decisions on behalf of kids are moving. And so, Dr. Abraham went in and just talked about really just people having to look in the mirror and getting their whole lives And, from the perspective of, for you as a dean of a school of education, with a responsibility of creating these educators and education leaders, what does that work look like?
Yeah, you know what, this is a great question. I'm still tickled by, the comment that was made, because the energy is here and I love it. I would say it looks a lot. It looks like many different things. I think number one is the reality that we have to understand that to go into this work means that we should always understand we have a discourse of care and love that we have with and for other people. Why else go into education if we don't care about human beings? And if we don't want what's best for people? I want what's best for every single child in this world. I want what's best for everyone who comes even after me. And I want not just what's best, but I want better. I want better than I ever had going through K-12 schools in the South. I want to understand what our kids need and fundamentally how we can support them to provide the resources and access to opportunity that some of us may have had and others of us may not have had. I think when we talk about this work, I hear the comment that it's not just about strategy, but everything for me is about strategy. And let me just say what I mean by that. We have to be strategic with making decisions about who is in front of students in a classroom. That's strategy. We have to be strategic when it comes to the curriculum that we are teaching, when we are working with our kids. That's strategy. We have to be so strategic when it comes to the teachers who we hire, the building principals who we employ, the education support staff that are in our schools, the superintendent of our districts, the school board members, the ways families are brought into conversations. We got to be strategic with all of that. And if we are not, then we have to take a moment and ask ourselves, without strategy, what result are we working toward? What is it that we want? Everything about education has to be strategic. And when I say strategic, it is about how decisions get made. It is about how decisions get unmade. It is about the ways that we have to understand that this entire business of teaching and learning and leading is not just about a single person. It is about our kids and our communities. It is about understanding how other people's children are our children. And we've got to care so much about human beings that we are willing to stand by ourselves if we have to, in order to do what we believe is right by our kids. That's fundamental. That's the basic. And if we cannot all agree to that, then I don't think we can have a conversation. Like, what is it that we want to impart when we have conversations with other people? We don't have to agree, but we've got to understand strategy means that we are not going to have anyone in our classrooms teaching when we have an understanding that they might not care about our kids. How can you teach when you don't care? So what we need to do is to go all the way back. How do I do this in a school of education? I'm asking important questions. And I am inviting people to ask questions about me, to me, for me, about what we value, what is at the core of this work we call education. And I'm not simply talking about what is it that we teach, because I would say, who do we teach? We teach people, and people teach us. I'm not worried about the curriculum as much. I'm worried about the human beings in our classrooms and in communities. I am worried about making sure that folks have access to the resources they need. I want to make sure that when kids are in classrooms, they can see, they have resources, they can read. And if they can't, I am willing to do what I need to do to ensure that they can. That's strategy. When we take a passive approach to education, then we get what the system was designed to give us. And it ain't meant for us. So how do we recenter this entire system to really understand why is it that we get up and do the work that we do with other people every day? As a school of education, we have a mission vision statement, and Elise, you know it. We talk about how we ignite learning and how we strive for well-being for all. We talk about family, community, and student success. We talk about forging engaged partnerships. I mean, we're talking about disrupting and transforming inequitable educational structures. So we teach, we research, we advocate, but we are also creating policy and practice. And in order to do that work, we can't do that work absent of working with other people. And that includes our families, communities, and children and young adults. So, you know, that might not answer the question, but I feel really strongly about, if we do not care about other human beings and their education, we shouldn't be teaching. If we don't care about creating a system that supports transformation, then we shouldn't be leading. And if we don't care about anyone else besides ourselves, then we shouldn't be talking about education. So then folks need to move out the way and let people who really have a commitment to doing the work do the work. We know what we need to do. We just need to be able to provide the space and opportunity for us to get this work done. And if we could do this, which we can, then all of our public schools, particularly in urban and rural communities, would function at a very high level, because we would have people teaching and leading at a very high level because they would be supported.
Listen, I'll say this, and one thing I say that's so important, Doc, what you said, you need love, you need strategy, you need to be real with yourself. When you talk about the love piece and the strategy piece and be real with yourself, you can encompass that in having courage. I'm going to tell you, when you advocate for the most marginalized group in the country, when we talk about Black and brown children, and you really start to say, I believe these kids could be successful, I promise you, I ain't trying to scare you, you're going to get attacked. Google Dr. Abraham. My first year had a vote of no confidence. They had me in the news so much, I thought I was running for local government. I didn't know what was going on, because I kept pushing the union and telling them, these kids, my kids that look like me, they can graduate high school at 90%. We end up doing it, but it don't come without no battles and no scars. And when I talk to school leaders and principals and teachers all around the country, when they care and argue and push the needle for Black and brown children, they get ostracized. They're alone. So you really have to fortify in your mind, and I don't want to scare you, but if you're serious about this education game, if you're serious about really making a difference, I'm not talking about the ones who just trying to get a pension and you trying to retire. I'm not talking to you. If you really, really care about the kids you serve and really say, I'm making a difference and I'm not just a teacher. You know, Doc, I hate that word. I hate when I hear teachers say that. Well, I'm just a teacher. What can I do? What are you talking about? You saving lives. There was an article I just read that says, if children could read, can I give you a little conspiracy? What I'm thinking? Can I give you a little something real quick? Do we got a little time? I got like 2 minutes. If children could read by the 3rd grade, it reduces their rate of mortality. Like, they will not get killed in the streets. That's what the research says. It reduces their mortality rate. We also know the research says that prison cells are built off of 3rd and 4th grade reading scores. We know this. But we also know the statistics say that for Black males, we represent around 6% of the country, but over 36% of the prison population. That's in prison. Black people, we represent about 13% of the country, over 50% of the prison population. See, there is a correlation between education and prison. We know that. That's called the school to prison pipeline. So for you as an instructor, as a teacher, when you have those babies in front of you, if you're the principal, if you're the leader, and you have those children in front of you, I want you to be whole and understand that you're doing God's work. You're doing something that is special. But if you're going to do something special and you're going to do something miraculous, understand it's thankless. You're not going to get a lot of applause for it. You're not going to get that many accolades for it. And you're going to go through more hell than you get heaven. But at the end of the day, those kids will be on this earth because you did something. And so I don't know who's in the room. All I can see is blank screens. I hate Zoom. I hate this virtual stuff. I hate it to my core. But nevertheless, I'm here with you. I want you to know that you are doing good work, but it's going to start with some backbone. We can give you strategy. We can give you concept. We can't give you love, and we can't give you backbone. I wish I could, but I can't. You're going to have to come to the table with that on your own. Sorry, I just need to add that in.
No,
Can I just
absolutely.
say something real quick?
Go ahead,
Dr.
Dr.
Abraham, I can see who's in the room. I see the names and I know them. And we have some brilliant people who, some past administrators, some past superintendents. We have people in here that have some knowledge and wisdom that, as I said in the chat, please feel free to add your comments or ask a question. But, you know, I think the conversation, I'm so grateful for this conversation because it's so necessary, right? And so, one of the things we had Dr. Bettina Love just give a keynote address, and one of the things that we were talking about was just what's happening in our school system and about choice, and you know, even a question around charter schools and you know, families just trying to find another alternative for their children. And so, can we talk just a few minutes about what needs to happen? Because in that conversation, it was that sometimes even they get to charter school and it's not much different, right? You think that you're going to to get a greater experience and it ends up being kind of similar. So what are some of the suggestions that you can give to families? Because again, this summit is focused on having some parent engagement and educating families about how they can advocate for the needs of their young people. But in a system when we know, Elise just gave some background about just how our school system here in Pittsburgh has been historically, you know, not favorable for our Black and Brown children. So any suggestions on what we can do to help our families navigate in the space that they're in right now, especially now during COVID?
Yeah, I would say family, and I'll say this, for real. This is a problem for our Black and Brown children. This is a problem around the country. I mean, everywhere around the country, and people don't want to deal with it. I think there's so many things that we need to do. If you can find listen, let me be honest with you. If you can find a charter school that's going to treat your baby right, go to a charter school. But that's not just like the silver bullet. I think that if I gave a parent any strategies, the first thing, and let me just kid, I got to diverge a little bit because people always blaming parents for the school failure. You know, if I ask anybody like, why them Black kids ain't doing right? Because they parents. Man, if they had better parents, they'd be right. That's not a lie. So, you know, when we talk about urban schools, if the superintendent can't hold the principal accountable, how you expect the parent can? He cut the check. Nevertheless, if I'm a parent, what I'm telling you to do is you got to know where your child stands, and you have to say, okay, where's my kid's report card? At least have the information that where your child is performing, number one. Number two, always introduce yourself to the teachers. In my years of education and working as a principal, school counselor, teacher, all of that, what I found is that when parents are present and they're willing to introduce themselves to the teacher and have a conversation, then teachers are less likely to pull some nonsense, right? Like if you're, and I don't want to give you like carte blanche to give people smoke, but if you present like, I'm here to support you, but I'm here to give you smoke at the same time, family, let me just say this, I'm Haitian American, I'm a Black man, I'm trilingual. I speak English, Creole, and I'm good in Ebonics. So I might vacillate between any of those languages, help me out. So the smoke means I'm willing to give somebody some argument from time to time. If you're willing to do that and really just have a conversation, then teachers are less likely to you know, try to give your kid a whole bunch of nonsense. So I say be present, track your kids and know where they are, really have a conversation with your children on the goals that they're setting for themselves. That's some short-term goals. And lastly, I would say when your child gets to high school, that is not the time to disengage. I see that as kids go from K through 5, parents are very involved. 6 through 8, they pull off a little bit. 9th grade, they feel like they want to take the reins off. When I was a high school principal, I tell my parents, look, 9th grade is the time you better ride that baby like Seabiscuit. We're going to ride this kid right into the finish line because this is not the time. This is the time where police is treating them like adults and sending them to jail. They killing our boys. They killing our Black and brown children. We want to make sure that we create success for them all the way through. But that high school year, you going through high school. This is the time when you got to bring up all that energy and be more aggressive in the high school years than you are, because the GPA for your children in high school is cumulative. What does that mean? It follows them from ninth grade all the way to 12th grade. And the research shows us that when Black children, especially Black boys, get into high school, they become more disengaged from the curriculum than ever before. Think about this. When your Black children go into school, K through in kindergarten, they're excited to go to school. Something happens as they go from K through 9. They become more disengaged. It's those microaggressions that they're being encountered with, those little cuts that they get every single day that says by the time they get to high school, this ain't for me. It's not that it's not for them. It's the culture that's created. So parents, really, really stay involved. Really just send an email out, even if it's a text. I know you work and I know you got a lot of things on your plate, but don't just trust your kid at 13 years old that they have the answers, because they don't. Ride them babies and get up in their face and get up in the teacher's face. It's gonna be a little bit of a trial, but for 4 years, I got a 13-year-old right now. And good God Almighty, she know how to bring the anointing of cuss up out your boy. So help me, pray for me. But really stay involved in your children's life. My bad, y'all. Hey, listen. Hey, like, how we get this brother on? He out here wilding. My bad, y'all. I'll be good next time. I'm coming to Pittsburgh in a couple of weeks. I'll be good when I get there.
You know what? You be yourself. We love this. We just be yourself. And I think I'll just add in briefly to what you've already said. When we think of families, I think we have to think of family engagement. And it's not to say what families don't do. It is to say, how can we support families to continue to do the work that they've already been doing? It also means that we have to be able to meet people where they are, as opposed to expecting them to come all the way to us. So families work, families are busy. And so how do we ensure that families are invited into the spaces that we have created to learn with and teach with their kids? Sometimes we need to go to where people are. And that means, when we talk about schools and schooling, we oftentimes talk about what happens in the building, what happens in the classrooms, what happens in the hallways. What we really need to be talking about is bridging the divide between schools and schooling and communities. Our kids are in communities more than they are in schools. So how is it that we can build on the richness of what families and children and young people do in community spaces? And we figure out ways to sort of think about what they already do within community spaces. And then we use schools and schooling as a way to then elevate that even more, to deepen what they already know how to do. But when we get to points where we are dividing and separating school from community, we already have an issue. There are many, particularly in this city and across this region, there are many great folks who I could name who are doing such powerful work in community spaces. And we need to figure out ways to actually build on that work as we think about work happening in our schools and even in our universities. We can't maintain that separate distance between the two. I think that's one fundamental lesson that we need to actually hold on to. I would also say, we have to think about responsibilities and roles in very different ways. We think that a teacher is responsible for this only during this time period. We think that families are responsible for this only during these time periods. We have to reimagine responsibility, and we have to take ownership of making sure we build this community-based approach to actually making sure that kids and young people are surviving and thriving in whatever spaces they find themselves in. And so it's not just that, oh, she's the dean of a school of education. No, I'm a human being in community with other people. And I was a human being in community with other people before I became a dean of a school of education. I will always be a human being in community with other people. I will always be a person who wants to understand what change we need to make in order to live in ways that are productive and engaging and positive, regardless of our titles and positions. I think what we need to do is ask ourselves and each other a few questions. Do you care enough about people to be in community with them? Do you care enough about people to listen to their perspectives, even if those perspectives differ from your own? Do you care enough about teaching and learning to understand that teaching and learning happen in every single space that we inhabit, from our school buildings to our community spaces to inside of our homes, with families, with all of the folks who are peers to us and who are not. I think we also have to ask ourselves a question about agency. Do we have agency? And when we talk about agency, do we also understand that families have agency? Families have voices, and those voices need to be a part of all decision-making processes that we actually participate in. We cannot make decisions about children and young people and adults when we talk about schooling or teaching and learning without having multiple voices in the conversations. Fundamentally, families have to be in the conversations, and they have to be invited into the conversations. And I think that's also important. If we're talking about agency and we're talking about families, we also have to talk about agency when it comes to who teachers are and how teachers teach and learn. We're also teaching and learning. It's not just that we're teaching, we are teaching and learning. When we ask ourselves questions about our agency as educators, automatically we've got to ask questions about the agency of kids and young people as teachers and learners. It's a reciprocal relationship here. It's not just that kids and young folks are learners, they're also teachers. And how do we build that type of understanding and how we function, whether as a school building, a school district, communities, families, teachers, educators, students, young folks? And I think that, and I write about this. I have amazing folks who take me up on invitations to deepen our collective learning. And so our new book is about to drop. It's titled, Where is the Justice? Engage Pedagogies in Schools and Communities. Wow. And it's coming out in October. And this book is a labor of love because we just go straight there and we ask the question, where is the justice? Like, we talk about teaching and learning. We talk about what happens in school buildings. We're not talking about what happens across school buildings and communities. And so we present, I hope, what is a creative approach to thinking about justice work with a large school district, with families who participated in this project for about 5 or so years. We work with 90 educators across PK through 12 and beyond, social workers, therapists, school counselors, urban gardeners, folks in community spaces who oftentimes aren't seen as educators. We talk about the work that we collectively did in this urban school district. And we end each chapter with a found poetry. I love found poems. And so the found poem is about the words that we have heard from folks about justice, engagement in schools and communities. And, one of the questions that we end with, one of the chapters is thinking about what does it look like to have discussions that critically examine questions of freedom and that draw on creative practices in freedom and in liberation with students. I think those are the same types of questions that we need to be asking ourselves when we talk about families and family engagement. And because I mentioned found poem, I'm going to end with this one really quickly. This is one of the found poems that we include in this book. And it's titled, on not waiting. And it's a simple found poem. And it simply says, still waiting for what? Like, what y'all still waiting for? Still waiting for what? Engage pedagogies and justice work. Still waiting for what? Bringing learning to life with students, with teachers, with communities, with us, for us, because there is justice. And I think that's the approach that we need to take when we talk about teaching, learning, and leading across multiple spaces to include schools and communities, with families and with students.
That's real. Go ahead, Dr. Abraham.
No, I was just gonna say that's powerful. I mean, I listen, I got some goosebumps, and I got to get that book too. I want to be one of the first ones. So October's my birthday, so I definitely got to get that book. That definitely came out on a blessed month. And listen, and as we're talking, I really want to encourage the educators and the people here, or whoever might watch this. I teach a diversity class at a local college here, and this white lady said to me, and I was talking about race, and she said, this is how she sounds in my ears. So just again, she said, "This is just so difficult. It's so hard. I'm so tired of all of this." And I said, "Tired? You ain't done nothing." I mean, it's okay. You haven't physically done anything for you to be tired, right? You ain't out there marching. You ain't doing anything. But I want to encourage people. The work is really about, when we talk about all of these things, we're talking about it really at a macro level. You really have to just say, in my space, in my area, how can I make a difference? See, I think sometimes we want to go, and I love the marching and the protesting. I love it. But if the protest doesn't happen in the boardroom where you work at, there's a problem. If the protest doesn't happen for the children you serve, and if you don't argue for Black and brown children in the teacher's lounge when they talking crazy, if you don't argue for Black and brown children when you see that teacher doing that wrong to that student and you turn your blind eye, Dr. King said, if you see a injustice and you do nothing, you just as bad as the people that's doing it. So if you see that going on, that's where the protest starts. And let me tell you, baby, you may lose your job. They may look at you like you crazy, but you got to ask, what is it worth? And what do you really care about this? And I think me and Doc have said this over and over again. This is the theme of this conversation. And I never met Dr. Valerie. Say that right? I've never met her. This is my first time meeting her. And we didn't plan this. Love is the care, is the love. That has to be the engine that drives you to do the work. That your job is, I care about kids more than I care about me personally, per se. That's what I care about, right? Like I care about helping the kids more than I care about this paycheck. Damn that paycheck if you see kids about to get killed and about to get hurt or going to prison and you don't say nothing and you're supposed to be a leader. That's accounted to your hands. If you know this kid can't read, but you don't want to do the extra work, so what's easiest for you to refer them to special education? That's on you. When you know that kid, you shouldn't have suspended that kid, but the teachers were saying, "Oh, you got to suspend him because we're going to call the union on you because we feel unsafe," and you do that and that kid gets in trouble in the streets, that's on you. And I'm telling you from experience. I'm not talking to you from somebody who just what I read. I'm telling you, I've done that. I made a mistake and suspended a kid with no thought. That kid, the same kid, ended up getting arrested. Same kid ended up getting a record. That same kid dead right now. That started with me. I own that. So for when I talk to educators, I'm talking to you for somebody who I got the scars. I promise you I do. So you got to say, hey, I got to own this. I got to own the success of my school. And I'm going to advocate for my kids. And I'm going to love my kids because you are the difference maker between that child ending up in modern day slavery, the prison system, or the grave. And it is an unnatural thing for a mother to bury her child. It ain't natural. But there's a high correlation between school and prison, school and getting killed in the streets. I'm telling you, I've done the research. I know. That's all I got to say, family. I thought this was going to be a chat. Ain't nobody said nothing.
Right.
Folks had their cameras off the whole time. I ain't know what kind of chat. Right. What kind of chatting y'all doing, Pittsburgh?
I know. This is I guess the year on Zoom. I'm not going to come on this screen type of chat, but I think that they did get a lot of knowledge today. Even if they didn't share their knowledge, they actually received some. So I thank you all for being here. Yeah, you all know, both of you know that, or all three of you know that I'm just in all the work that you do, and I'm a fan, truly a fan.
Definitely. And I would just say, I'm really just thinking about that phrase, where is the justice, and kind of bringing us back to the beginning of this conversation as we think about, this MOU report and, the 30 years of advocacy that Black folks have been doing in this city around Black children getting what they need and what they deserve, and frankly what we pay for as taxpayers. And so that's something that's really resonating with me as we're kind of closing out our time together. And I did just want to make a comment. I know that we kind of started down the line a little bit of just talking about choice and autonomy. And I think that this idea of agency is very important. You know, when we think about what we've experienced over decades, you know, it's hard to, I think it's harder to justify why we continue to make this choice versus the choice that, you know, the alternative. And I know that we love to have the conversation and throw the C word in there, but, you know, charters aren't really the cause. They are a symptom of a system. And so I think we have to be reflective and mindful of that as well. You know, 30 years is a very long time. It's what, almost a generation, a little bit more than a generation. And how many of us can truly say that we would stay committed and loyal to anything for over a generation if we knew that it was causing us harm? And why that same energy or that same, you know, it's not applied to our schools, I think continues to baffle us. And so, you know, I do want to acknowledge, you know, some of the folks in the room, you know, Miss Wanda Henderson, who's one of the original complainants on the memorandum of on the Advocates for African American Students, and continues to be on the Equity Advisory Panel and continue to move that work forward. It's beautiful, but it's hurtful. 30 years, and when we, let's try another 5, let's try another 5, let's try another 5. You know, and enough is enough. And so, you know, where is the justice, the self-reflection on why are we doing the work? And also, I think that what are we willing to risk to really ensure that our kids get what they need? And how do we continue to do that in love? And not just love for ourselves, not just love for ego or position or title or a nice little tagline in our local paper, but love for these children and for folks who don't have the ability to advocate for themselves. And so I thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dr. Kinlock. Thank you, Dr. Abraham. It's nice to meet you. I'm excited to hear that you'll be visiting our city soon.
Tell us about that.
Yeah,
some
please.
Information so people, because a lot of these people are, you know, educators, and he's going to be at Carlo, right?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be at Carlo October 9th. I'll be keynoting, and then they have me speaking at, they worked me too, boy. They got me speaking for like 6 hours, I think. I looked at the schedule like, God. But yeah, so I'm blessed. I'll be there. I'll have books there. And just, you know, if you can make it, it'd be a blessing. I'd love to connect with you. I put my social media, my Instagram and my email in there. If you're on Instagram, please follow me. I would love to connect with you. Dr. Valerie, I got to get your contact information, Queen. You're amazing. And Miss Johnson, I get your contact information also. But you know, follow me. I'll be in between now and the end of October. I'll be from Wisconsin all the way to California and in between. So I would love to visit you at your college, your school, or wherever. Just inbox me and I'll be there. But I'll be at Carlo College October 9th.
Great. We're glad to have you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day at the summit.
Yeah, let me just give a quick plug. At 3:00, we have another crucial conversation around the attacks on critical race theory. Dr. Venus Evans-Winters is moderating that, and we have several different people on that panel. So you all should have the link, just like you had this link in your WOVA app. So click on that and it'll be live streamed, and we will see you there.